Escape from New York. This is Mark Fisher from Mark and the Millennials. And of course, we also have the dumbest bill in America. I want to welcome, of course, Garrick Ross. How you doing, Garrick?
Oh, it's great to be back.
We're back.
We're back. We're back for good for a while.
Tan, rested, and ready because, of course, all of the vacations. It's the month of August.
Yeah, you know, get them in. Dog days of summer, they say.
That's right. And we want to welcome Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and of course, Adam Katora, our producer. And this podcast is named Escape from New York.
Yes.
And of course, the dumbest bill in America. Why is it named Escape from New York, Garrick?
Well, because if COVID didn't scare you off, maybe Cuomo or DeBlasio will.
That's right. Exactly. Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse. You have politicians who just can't figure out how to govern anything.
And the worst part is they can't govern, but they entirely disagree with each other over literally everything ever.
Everything, except they're kind of doing it out in the open now.
Yeah.
Before it was behind the scenes, and they were trying to keep it low, on the down low.
Tensions low, but now there's definitely a disdain between the two of them, which is very fascinating to see because it's an embodiment of, I think, the two of the bridging gap within the Democratic Party. You know, for as much as I think Cuomo is very liberal, he still represents an establishment type, whereas, you know, DeBlasio very much wants to be AOC, except...
What we're trying to... It's funny, because what I'm starting to realize is there are people like Cuomo, politicians, I mean, who are from the old guard Democrat Party, who say all the right progressive things, because that gets them elected, but they don't really believe it.
No.
Which, of course, is destructive, because then what happens is you ultimately lead people down a path that is unsustainable, and then there's DeBlasio, who really believes it and is leading you down the path to destruction and still hasn't figured it out.
And if you think that Cuomo, you know, isn't, you know, somebody who's going to stick his finger up and, you know, see which way the wind's blowing, his dad ran Democrats for Reagan, so, you know, this is the lineage he comes from.
Pretty interesting. So, New York wants to engage in contact tracing and has started to do that at the border of New York. In order to get into the state and the city in particular, they have closed off that border so that when you enter, you need to actually be tested in a way. Usually they take your temperature, they ask you questions: where have you been, where are you coming from, why are you coming into New York, all the questions, of course, that a free society isn't supposed to ask. But they're doing it anyway. Wait a minute, I thought that the liberals didn't like borders.
Wow, we've talked about it many a time on this.
But now they do?
But now they're all for that, you know, securing the border, you know, contact tracing and making sure that everybody's accounted for and doing the things that they're supposed to do by the letter of the law.
So, contact tracing in New York is making a lot of New Yorkers really cranky because so many New Yorkers leave the city and the state for the purpose of doing what? Buying cigarettes and alcohol, because New York's taxes, their sin taxes and all their taxes are so outrageously high. People just go across the border to buy those things and come back. Well, now when they come back, they're being asked, well, where have you been? How long have you been there? You need to self-quarantine for 48 hours. You can't do this, you can't do that.
And they're doing it at ports of entry too. And if anybody knows anything about New York City, where most of New York happens, most people who work there leave the city.
They do.
You know, so they come in by train, they come in through the Port Authority on the bus, and they immediately get off, and then now they're being interrogated.
So true. So here's good old Mayor DeBlasio announcing checkpoints in New York City before you get in. We have a clip on that, and here it is.
So starting today, we're going to do something new in New York City. We will have checkpoints at key entry points to the city. Travelers coming in from those states will be given information about the quarantine. They will be reminded that it is required, not optional. They'll be reminded that failure to quarantine is a violation of state law, and it comes with serious penalties. In fact, under certain circumstances, the fines can be as high as $10,000.
Yes, $10,000. But if you're riding in the street, you don't get fined at all. In fact, if you just happen to get arrested in New York City for rioting and breaking windows and pillaging and burning and doing all the other bad stuff, you get released immediately from jail, and who knows if you'll ever be found again. But if you come into New York City legally in your car, just because you went across the border real quick to get cigarettes or alcohol or whatever else you want to get, or you're just coming into the city, well, you could get fined $10,000.
Better yet, let's deny you your ability to feed your family, deny you your livelihood, your ability to work, you know, to support yourself and your family. But also, if you don't do what we say, we're going to take more from you. We're going to take $10,000 from you. And a lot of people who are destitute, who are most likely to be policed by, something like this, they're the ones who are going to inevitably be thrown in prison, hypothetically for not having the means to pay these fines.
Incredible.
And it's, there can be some merit to the idea of, ensuring that people coming from, California or wherever is adequately distancing themselves. But I mean, to the extreme of, running around New York and stopping everybody, asking them, where have you been? Where are you going? And if you don't do this, we're gonna take major action against you. It's incredible.
And you can certainly be an illegal immigrant into the United States and have been for years going into New York City. And DeBlasio says, we're going to protect you from ICE because ICE, those are the stormtroopers. Those are the bad guys. And we're not going to let them take you out of here. But in the meantime, suddenly, good old Americans can't travel freely in and out of New York City. And by the way, there are other states as well. But suddenly, DeBlasio is drinking the Kool-Aid, saying, no, Stalin has spoken. You cannot leave. You cannot go. We're going to give you $10,000. So here's Ted Long, New York City's vice president of New York City's and New York State's largest healthcare system, supporting DeBlasio's decision to have all these checkpoints. We have a clip on that, and here it is.
Tomorrow, we're going to be deploying teams to Penn Station to stop travelers to ensure that they've completed the travel form. We've made more than 86,000 phone calls to travelers coming into New York City from the designated high-risk states, and we've sent more than 20,000 text messages to date. And if we can't get through to you on the phone, we've deployed teams that are now knocking on your door to check in with you.
So look, the reason why we're playing this clip from Ted Long and also from Mayor DeBlasio is because of the incredible hypocrisy they're engaging in for all the things we've mentioned already. And if there were ever a great monologue that Tucker Carlson has engaged in to talk about their hypocrisy in New York City and the governing hypocrisy, it would be this particular monologue by Tucker Carlson. We have a clip on this, and it's some of the best satire I've ever heard, but true satire of the New York City officials. And you got to listen to this really carefully. It's fantastic. Here it is.
Oh, so Ted Long is going to deploy teams to Penn Station. Have you been to Penn Station recently? It's a homeless shelter, the whole thing. Oh, there's a guy with his trousers down, relieving himself in the corner. Hey, they're dealing crack right there. Oh, they're smoking it over here. Go to Penn Station and ask yourself, is this real? Is this America? But Ted Long is going to deploy teams to hassle people who are traveling to New York to help the city stay afloat. Right. Keep in mind the vehement little lecture you just heard about public health comes from the same people who forced coronavirus patients into nursing homes and killed many by doing it. These are the same leaders who gave violent rioters control of the city's streets, but suddenly they are very concerned about your health. Right.
So it was an incredible monologue. It was actually 10 minutes long and a bunch of different clips, but we're replaying this for you because it is just so fantastic, and it shows you how late to the argument these individuals are who are governing, who are finally deciding that they actually have to govern, but they keep making wrong decisions after wrong decisions, and here we are. Here we are. Now they're saying you can't come into New York City unless we're going to test you, and
yeah, and it's crazy because the first couple times I heard the clip, it didn't dawn on me, but they're talking about the travel form. Like, you got to fill out this travel form and you got to hand it in. And so just as we were sitting here, I looked it up, So you have to fill out an online form and submit it to them with all this information. And there's a list of states, right, that would require you to fill this form out. And unless your state is from the Northeast Corridor, Delaware up to Rhode Island, you're filling this bad boy out. And so it's everybody who's presumably going to New York is having an extensive questioning, and it's funny because you can debate the merit of the policy, but where were the merit of these debates and these policies when we're talking about general border things, general border security, how we manage people in and out of this country, and it's throwing caution to the wind when we're talking about immigration, but when it comes time to dealing with COVID in New York City, they're all for closing down the borders, making sure nobody can come in. It's like, I don't have a problem with politicians as long as they maintain some ideological consistency, but I hate when you see these episodes where people pick one issue and they're so staunch in that, this is a violation of fundamental human decency to not let, illegal immigrants into this country. But at the same time, when it comes time to dealing with everyday Americans and their right to travel across all 50 states and go and do all these things that being an American entitles you to, and now we're talking about a whole separate issue. Now we have to basically abdicate every fundamental policy we had here and go against them from here. But this is the right thing to do.
Well, isn't it interesting, too, that Tucker Carlson's talking about the fact that they have to, on the one hand, fill out this paperwork, as you mentioned, Garrick, but what happened to the paperwork that had to be filled out and should have been filled out when they were admitting people into nursing homes after they discharged them from the hospital because they weren't sick enough to be in the hospital, and then they sent them to nursing homes? Where was the paperwork for that? Where was the guidance for that? And now suddenly, they're acting like, well, we're so virtuous, we're so concerned about saving lives that now we're going to make sure that only the people that come into New York City now are people that aren't sick or haven't been exposed to anyone that is sick. And yet that's not the way they've been governing for the past several months.
And to me, it's even more frustrating, and so we haven't been around very frequently for the last month. There's a lot of things that have happened that I've got stored up that comes out with when we're talking about DeBlasio and Cuomo. Because if you listen to the news and those two politicians, I mean, they're taking a victory lap. Like look at us, we're ahead of everything. Cases are down, deaths are down, and it's like, but if you account for how much death they have per percentage of the amount of total deaths, I mean, they're more than a quarter. I mean, they're like, I think somewhere near half last time I looked, and it's, Cuomo's selling newspapers touting the curve and how great a job he's done, and it's just, to me, it's so indifferent.
And they're reporting it.
Yeah. And
this guy's done a great job.
Great job. Everybody's Cuomo's cheerleading team, and it's just, to me, it's just gross, because it's, it kind of spits in the face of all the people who died needlessly.
Absolutely.
And
it does.
And it shows that with politics, there is no accountability. As long as
Certainly
you're
not on
fighting
the
for
left.
the right time, for the right team, you have at it.
Certainly not on the left. Certainly if New York City's media had actually been honest and really reported what was happening and really did some critical thinking pieces, less people would have died. Certainly less people in nursing homes. And they were so late to that story. And the only people breaking those stories were the actual folks who were working in those nursing homes who decided that they had to contact all the media sources who finally some of them started covering it.
Yeah, and I heard a report out of the New York State Assembly. There's a lot of people, it's not a report, but it's some news, conservatives were talking about it. They had a hearing where they were supposed to be discussing these nursing home policies, and they wanted to invite, a series of people who were impacted, and the Democrats went out of their way to vet the list and make sure that, prominent figures, so I think her name is Janice Dean, and she's a meteorologist for Fox's network. They purposely uninvited her, even though, she lost all 4 of her grandparents, I believe, or her parents to COVID in this nursing home policy. But it's like, you don't want that truth out there. You don't want to hear somebody's testimonial about how emotional and devastating a loss this was, and needlessly so, because, to anybody who was paying attention in February or March, one thing was very evident, and it is that no matter what was going to happen, we need to protect elderly people, the most at risk in the population. And so anybody with a functioning brain should have thought that putting old people into nursing homes was murder.
Absolute murder. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And we have covered that repeatedly at Mark and the Millennials, but we can't cover it enough. We really can't say it enough.
Because this is what happens when government fails. People do die.
The thing the government's supposed to do most is to protect people, keep them safe. And in New York City, that's exactly what they didn't do, and they continue to do it with the riots by letting that happen. Of course, in Chicago and in Seattle and Minneapolis and elsewhere. And these are all blue state governors and blue state mayors that allow this stuff to happen. So this podcast is called Escape from New York, and there's a reason we're calling it that, because as a result of this incredibly poor governance in New York City, people can't leave fast enough. There is an exodus. There's an exodus of not just the wealthy, but now the middle class from New York City. And these are folks who are deciding, you know what, I'm going to move out of the city, and I'm going to move at least across the river, perhaps in New Jersey, or maybe on Long Island, or maybe in Connecticut temporarily. until the dust settles, but increasingly these same individuals are making decisions to move south. And just to give you an example, I have a good friend in South Florida, and he said he was approached by a broker in Manhattan to see if he would just be interested in selling his house because there aren't enough house listings in South Florida for so many of these individuals who want to relocate to South Florida from the Northeast, but almost exclusively from New York.
That's crazy.
So why? Well, here's an example. Here's a statistic. Manhattan apartment deals and rentals have plunged 57%. So the number of people who are trying to rent places in Manhattan have plunged 57%. So imagine if you own real estate. So what's happening in New York is there's this exodus of the wealth, there's this exodus of the middle class, and here the funny thing is the average person's out there saying, oh, well, it's the wealthy. By average, I'm talking about on the left. Yeah. Who cares about the wealthy? Guess what? The wealthy in New York City especially, they are the ones who are funding these crazy programs. So if you lose the wealthy in New York City, you lose your ability as a liberal and as a progressive to spend tons of money to support your social programs, which keep you in power.
The top 10% pay like 57% of all the taxes in the country.
And in New York City, apparently the top 1% pays like almost a much larger amount. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but apparently it's an unbelievable amount.
Yeah.
And so back in 1981, there was a movie called Escape from New York, and that movie was about New York City becoming a penal colony in the future, and because of the fact that there was so much chaos that you needed a large place, like an island, kind of like Manhattan, and you turned Manhattan into a penal colony, and there was just nothing but bedlam occurring, kind of like what's happening today. And if you have the middle class and you have the wealthy leaving New York City, then New York City becomes basically ungovernable because there's no money to be able to support all those social programs that Bill DeBlasio has promised all these folks that he was going to provide to them if you don't have the wealth that is there, because the wealth is left. So we have a clip from Escape from New York, and this is a movie from 1981, and you have to listen to this clip, and here it is.
It's not the future we wanted, but the future that happened. Once a great city, now a high-security prison, designed to keep society's criminals in. But now, everything rides on getting one person out.
The survival of the human race, Briscoe. Something you don't give a shit about.
Kurt Russell stars as Snake Plissken in John Carpenter's science fiction action classic, Escape from New York.
So that's the clip from Escape from New York, which is really funny because it kind of is looking into the future about what could happen, except the future is happening right now.
Right now.
And Governor Cuomo is really concerned about this exodus, Garrick. This exodus from New York State and New York City. He's so concerned that he's now actively talking about it. When was the last time you heard a Democrat talk about losing the rich and saying, you know what, we actually kind of need them.
Yeah.
We need their tax money. We need their income.
Because DeBlasio thinks he can just write a new tax and increase your rates, and the rest of the people will pay it, and it's no big deal.
And that they won't leave.
Who cares? Or he sticks his head in the sand. At least Cuomo is kind of realistic about what's going on.
He is, and kudos to Cuomo for at least attacking this, because I'm sure he's going to get hit really from the left. It's only a matter of time for talking about this. Here's Governor Cuomo. We have a clip from him talking about the exodus from New York and why it concerns him, what he's willing to do. Here is the clip.
We used to be worried millionaires' tax people might leave. No. The burden shifted. We're trying to get people to come back. I literally talk to people all day long who are now in their Hamptons house, who also lived here, or in their Hudson Valley house, or in their Connecticut weekend house. And I say, you got to come back. When are you coming back? We'll go to dinner. I'll buy you a drink. Come over, I'll cook. They're not coming back right now.
So, and why would they? Why would they? If you have a mayor who's saying, yeah, the restaurants are closed and they can only open at a certain percentage, and you have rioting, and you have bedlam, and you're being told the police are going to be canceled, and that your property and your person can't be protected, why would you move back?
Additionally, economically, there's that new reality that this country is facing in terms of how work is conducted. And a lot of companies you're going to see aren't going to go back to physical work in New York City. Remote work, remote, offices, and all these things are going to be more prevalent. So people aren't going to need to come back to New York. There's going to be no rationale for them. And then when you take into account all those things you just mentioned on top of it, where's the incentive? What am I getting out of going back to New York City? And so they're not going to. And as somebody from New Jersey, I can certainly empathize a lot with some of the other economic arguments. I mean, New York State is already a high tax state as it is. But then you take city taxes and then you add them on, and it's like more than half of your monthly income is going out of your pocket in taxes.
It's a surcharge.
It's incredible, and a lot of people want to leave and go to better places. That's why people are emigrating to Texas, to a lot of these Midwest states, because it's much more beneficial. Or in New York's case, they talk about the snowbirds. A lot of them are just relocating to Florida, like you said, more permanently.
Sure.
Because it's more tax advantageous, and work is following them.
And South Florida has a ton of New Yorkers who have moved there over the past 50 years and stayed there. And now that possibility is more real than ever. And Cuomo is saying, move back, we need you back. Well, when you think about it, folks, if you are a restaurant owner, or if you own a gym, or if you own any kind of service type of business, you need people of all types to live in your city, including the wealthy, including the upper middle class, including the middle class, and so forth. You need those folks because those are your customers. And now, since those folks have options, they're the first to leave. And now they're looking at their options and saying, well, do I really want to go back to Manhattan, or do I want to just relocate?
Yeah.
And as you said,
mobility is so much easier to do today than ever before.
And the middle class can too.
Yeah.
I mean, I have friends that he worked in the local government in Long Island and Nassau County. And they ended up relocating outside of New York, initially to Florida, and they were never happier in their lives.
Yeah.
But they loved New York. They would have loved to have stayed there.
Yeah.
But it was unsustainable.
My parents are from New Jersey. Neither of them live in New Jersey anymore. I mean, my mother loves New Jersey. I mean, the beaches, a lot of the shore culture and things that we have down there. But, she lives in Texas now, and she's, there's things she misses, but she's never been happier because financially, people say money doesn't buy happiness, but it certainly makes it a lot easier to find it.
Well, certainly you can live a better life if you can keep more of your money. But when you have the government taking more and more of your income
and not giving you anything in return,
nothing really in return.
Yeah.
And you have DeBlasio saying, you don't deserve to have that income. I want to take more of that income until I'm king, until I'm dictator, until I'm Karl Marx, which is what he's been saying. So you heard a clip from Governor Cuomo concerning the exodus, and you heard Governor Cuomo's real concerns about all this money leaving and why he wants it to come back to Manhattan. But now we have a clip from Bill DeBlasio, and you'll see the difference between Cuomo's concern and DeBlasio's concern about all these people leaving. So here's a clip from Bill DeBlasio. He's the mayor of New York City. You can't believe it. Here it is.
About the folks out in the Hamptons, I have to be very clear about this. We do not make decisions based on the wealthy few. That I was troubled to hear this concept that because wealthy people have a set of concerns about the city, that we should accommodate them, that we should build our policies and approaches around them. That's not how it works around here anymore.
That's very vague. I don't really know what that means.
This is the classic progressive, that we should not be concerned about the wealthy coming back. In fact, we're not concerned about them at all. What we would like for them to do is to just go away. But as a progressive, what they're saying is
he needs the tax money.
That they would just like to take all of their money from the wealthy and redistribute that money, in which case they're going to run out of money literally in probably a year if they were to do that. Yeah. I mean, this guy de Blasio, this mayor, we've said before, he's the dumbest mayor in America. Pretty close to that mayor in Chicago. She's dumb as well. But de Blasio still doesn't get Econ 101.
No.
He needs these people to support his progressive agenda in New York City, and without them, the agenda goes bye-bye.
He's going to unravel 2 decades of pretty solid mayoral governance from Republicans, and Republican version of Bloomberg, but it's a whole separate conversation.
Yeah, the next mayor rather is going to be a Republican without question.
Probably, but this. So we're not just saying this to bash on Democrats because it's fun. I mean, sometimes it is, but we're basically trying to articulate. Governance needs to reach a point where it's accommodating to its agenda, but also the means of achieving its agenda. So these governors in New York, these mayors in New York City. You have to make it appealing for people to come to your area, to want to live in your district, your state. And, you can cut taxes. You can cut, the responsibility on each person to pay more and more every year like they continue to do. You can expand the economy. You can't let it contract and increase taxes because you're just basically, you're causing an issue to further cascade without any sense of resolve.
And the founders, their idea of federalism, you can see it at work now, which is you have these states that can govern themselves, and they can choose to have unique cultures and unique tax structures according to the consent of the governed, with the consent of the governed. But at some point, the governed may decide that, we're going to leave.
Yeah.
And you see the Escape from New York clip, you've heard that, and you've seen it, and now you see it in action in New York City, in New York State, where people are saying, you know what? For so long, I love this place, and I do believe this about New York City. New York City is a really cool place.
It's got a lot of charm to it.
There's a lot going on. There are a lot of different things happening. I mean, you've got so many different parts of the city that are unique.
I love the city.
There are
growing up
characters.
an hour outside of it, I went all the time. I mean, just the various different places, whether you're going to a Yankees or a Mets game or you're in Times Square. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity to experience different cultures and different ways of life and enjoy a lot of the great things that a city like that brings to the table. And it's a shame to see a lot of it,
one man,
hurt.
one mayor is literally ruining that city. And what is amazing is everybody sees it. And I gotta wonder at what point the folks in New York City at all levels, whether you're, lower middle class, you're poor, you're middle class, upper middle class, rich, at what point do people say, you know what? That's what always made New York work, and there was upward mobility, but we don't have upward mobility now in New York City. We have downward mobility.
Yeah.
And that is the progressive way. That's what they don't tell you. But now we're seeing what the reaction is.
Yeah. That's pretty spot on.
Absolutely. So the media fails at a hatchet job on Donald Trump. It backfires completely. I want to say that again. The media has completely failed. They tried to do a hatchet job on Donald Trump. It backfired. It was in Bedminster, New Jersey. Where's Bedminster, by the way, since you're from Jersey?
An hour north of me.
Okay. So it's real close to the city line, New York City line?
Yeah, but a little west of it.
Okay, a little west of it. And Bedminster has a Trump property with golfing and so forth. And Trump was at that property, and he was holding a press conference. And he had a lot of supporters there as well. And the media asks him a question. And of course, it completely backfires. You have to listen to this because there are a lot of subtleties in Trump's response. It's kind of funny. And we have a clip on that, and here it is.
Says that the pandemic is disappearing, but we lost 6,000 Americans this week. And just in this room, you have dozens of people who are not following the guidelines in New Jersey, which say you should not have more.
No, they don't have to. It's a political activity.
Why are you saying such a bad thing?
You're wrong on that because it's a political activity. They have exceptions, political activity, and it's also a peaceful protest. So when you have, and as you know, they asked if they could be, a number of, and to me they look like they all have, pretty much all have masks on, but you have an exclusion in the law. It says peaceful protest or political activity, right? In fact, specifically, it says exactly political activity or peaceful protest. And you could call it political activity, but I'd call it peaceful protest because they heard you were coming up, and they know the news is fake. They understand it better than anybody. And they asked whether or not they can be here. Like the question about Russia. He doesn't mention Iran was in the report. He doesn't mention, or he mentions very late that China was in the report, because that's the way they are. They're not. If the press in this country were honest, it wasn't corrupt, if it wasn't fake, our country would be so much further ahead. But we're doing really great. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Amen to that.
I'll
if
give
we
him a lot
had
of
an
credit.
honest press,
That was
which is
kinda
what we're
funny.
supposed to have. We're supposed to have an honest press. The press is supposed to be reporting about what has happened as opposed to trying to be part of the news.
Oh man, we got all these people here violating social distance. First of all, mind your own business. Two,
It's up to them.
yeah, I mean, I just thought it was funny though. It was a good line where he was saying, well, we'll call this a peaceful protest. Isn't that fine? So these people all can do whatever they want.
Because some people had masks on. Actually, almost everybody in the room had masks on. A couple did not. And the reporter's like, well, I mean, this should not be permitted because a couple of these people, like 2 or 3, didn't have masks on.
Yeah, you don't
and
know
that's what the
their
president said.
circumstances are. Yeah, and
It's a protest.
Yeah,
it's a protest.
Yeah, they can do what they want.
Yeah, because you
That
don't
was
report
good.
it when the other protesters do it. I mean, in fact, they're actually probably really breathing heavy at the other protests because they're burning, pillaging, and doing whatever else they do. And I'm sure that requires a lot of energy, so they're probably really breathing hard. And if there's anything coming out of their mouth that's corona-like, everybody's going to get it.
I'll give Trump a lot of credit. That is some of the fun parts about Trump is, not a lot of other presidents I could think of who would be willing to say something like, who have no issue being like, comical about things, or making a joke like that. And he's just like, yeah, it's a protest, whatever. Because I mean, obviously, anybody here who's been on social media has seen that joke at least a half dozen times on the internet. But it's kind of funny when your president does it too.
Oh, it's fantastic. This is what I really think that presidents, I've said this in the past, I think presidents are made for the time. And as imperfect as this presidential vessel is, this guy called Donald Trump, and he is imperfect, let's face it, very much so. He is the only person I can think of that is in the Republican Party who's willing and has taken on not just the Democrat Party, which
media.
is the opposition, but the media, which is working for the Democrat Party.
That's very fair. I mean, because for all my complaints, when you look at Romney, Bush, older Bush, they never fought back. I mean, George H.W. Bush was a war hero, and he let the media walk all over him and call him a frail, for lack of a better word, like a bitch for, an entire term. And it's refreshing to see somebody acknowledge what a lot of Republicans have been feeling for a very long time, and is that the media doesn't take them seriously, doesn't take their ideas seriously, and has a pretty consistent narrative of saying that we're inadequate or a lesser party in the country, despite the last 2 decades of consistent Republican majorities and good governance that has yielded pretty fruitful results, and that we are living in the most prosperous country in the world and the most prosperous civilization in human history.
And what was happening before the coronavirus? The economy was booming.
It was the best it had ever been.
Best it had ever been in not just American history, but world history.
Yeah.
The economy was booming. You have a president who's taken on a country, China, which is not just our rival, but really is our enemy.
Yeah.
And they are our enemy. The Chinese Communist Party is our enemy.
Here's the thing.
Because of the theft.
We talk about, a lot of Democrats like to peddle that Russian narrative for a very long time. There was
3.5 years.
There was an article that came out the other day, and it was talking about, round 2 of, Putin wanting Trump to be president. But also in the same article, they're talking about how China has very clearly identified Biden as their guy in this election. And so my question is, are we going to run the same gambit? If, hypothetically, say Biden does win, are we going to say China stole the election? Are we going to run around in circles and do that? I mean, no, I don't think the Republicans are going to be like that because, we get it, The idea that countries don't have a favorite, potential candidate to me is asinine. I mean, anybody would know that you obviously have a vested interest in who the U.S. president is. It's how the world works. So, there's my little tangent.
Don't you think? No, it's good. Don't you think it's interesting also that China, what they would not do during this election, what they would never do, is prior to the election talk about the dealings they've had with Joe Biden's son, and how they funded some of his businesses, and how Joe Biden allowed his son on Air Force Two to travel with him, not just to China multiple times, but other places as well. And then, if Joe Biden were elected, then and only then would the Chinese then use that as leverage to blackmail him. Mm-hmm. Now that you're president, President Biden, we're going to use all of this stuff that you and I know that we did to enrich you and your son and your family. We're going to use that to get a ton of concessions, because if we were ever able to bring this public, you would be not just impeached, but you would clearly be removed from office.
Yeah, I mean, I preach from this altar that, you know, the impending Cold War with China is probably going to be one of the most significant geopolitical events of my lifetime.
It's going to be far more than Russia.
Yeah.
Communist Russia.
You can't have somebody who's asleep at the wheel leading us during that time. And
you mean literally asleep?
Literally asleep, figuratively asleep. But, you know.
We're going to talk about that
We're
going to
talk about that, yeah.
So CNN's Brian Stelter.
Oh, my God.
The guy that is just, I actually cringe when he talks.
Can I be honest with you, Mark?
Yes.
It really disappoints me. We both went to the same college.
Where did Stelter go?
He went to Towson, too.
He went to, Brian Stelter went to Towson?
Yes.
Man, that's incredible. I had no idea,
yeah.
actually. So CNN's Brian Stelter, who has his own program on CNN, says the media is coordinating to take down Joe Biden. I got to repeat this because you have to listen to it to hear it. CNN's Brian Stelter says the media, like all of the media, is coordinating to take down Joe Biden. What? I mean, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC.
I wonder where he's been for the last.
They're not trying to. They're in
4
fact
years.
they're in bed with Joe Biden, trying to get him elected.
Oh my God! Yeah, nobody's asked him a serious, critical question. Nobody's seen him, first of all, in however long. I mean, he's even said he's going to do the convention from his basement.
Of course he is. Yes.
You know,
and he's going to have an earpiece in the entire time. Someone's going to be reading the speech to him. Word by word, he's going to be repeating it.
Oh yeah.
Same thing's going to happen in the debate. I'm convinced. He's going to have an earpiece, and they're going to ask him a question. It won't be in person, of course, because then they'll see the earpiece. But earpieces, of course, have gotten a lot smaller. This technology is really tiny now. And then they will be giving Joe the answers. But I'm convinced that even when you give Joe the answers, he still manages to mess it up. That's when they're really
machine,
bad.
Yeah, no kidding.
So we have a clip with CNN's Brian Stelter talking about how everybody's conspiring to take down their boy, Joe Biden. We have that clip, and here it is.
Entire media companies essentially exist to tear down Joe Biden. Is there an equivalent to that on the left, tearing down Trump?
There really isn't. And, you know, what I would say, it's really a diet of this type of information that a lot of these voters are getting. A lot of the voters that I talk to, I can, when I interview them, I do hear them saying a lot of the talking points that sound very familiar from some of these shows, which I try to listen to when I'm out on the campaign trail or when I'm at home, watching TV. You know, you can hear these comments being echoed by voters, and you know that this is the diet that they're on. AM radio, conservative talk, also social media. I mean, the Trump campaign is running a full-blown campaign on social media that is completely off the radar for a lot of regular media is not covering this. But I mean, you have folks, Laura Trump, Kimberly Guilfoyle, Katrina Pearson. The campaign is running, kind of a parallel campaign online. And if that's all they're getting, to the exclusion of kind of the more traditional legacy media, then it really is no surprise kind of what their understanding is of this country and of our politics.
Can you believe that you just heard that?
Holy cow. First of all, Brian Stelter, the question, is there anything like this comparable on the left? And then she's just like, no. How can you in good oh my God. I mean, look, I was for the longest time, I was trying to be a holdout. I was like, the media is good. No, I was wrong. I was wrong then. I mean, the idea that the media is it's just Republicans pouncing on Biden is just ridiculous. I mean, for the last 3.5 years, we've watched most of everybody center and left in media just absolutely lose their minds over Trump. And so first thing, ridiculous. Second part, wow, Republicans are talking about Republican talking points and ideas, and that the president's running a campaign. That's so bad.
And he's talking to Republicans, and he's using social media, and he's marketing only to them. That's so scary.
Wow, what a disaster. Who would let anybody do that? Run a campaign? My God, I feel like we're in 1860, Mark, back then. It's
frightening.
It's just so stupid. But that's reliable sources for you, or I like to say unreliable sources.
And that's the name of the show,
right? That is Brian Stelter's Reliable Sources. Reliable Sources, where it really is honestly just an hour show of Brian trying to take a hatchet to all things Trump.
Absolutely. And the thing is, CNN, MSNBC, spent 3 years trying to get Donald Trump impeached.
Yeah.
And they were successful because they figured, well, if we got him impeached, then he could not get elected. That would just weaken him too much. And they impeached him prior to the coronavirus, but actually before it became known, but it was indeed ongoing at that particular time. And so to this day, you'll hear those same folks on CNN and MSNBC say, the president didn't do enough for coronavirus patients in the US, and he should have known. And meanwhile, Congress spent all of its time impeaching this president during that very valuable window of opportunity when the president had to defend himself instead of actually focusing on governing the country and engaging in international affairs.
Yeah, for a CNN show, I will say Brian Stelter does spend a lot of time worried about other news networks.
Yeah, that's because they're failing.
Yeah,
because CNN is failing.
The lowest viewership of any of the 3 primetime cable news networks. The point that most people would rather watch MSNBC than CNN, which to me I find astonishing.
It is astonishing. But you know what's the other thing that's astonishing about this comment from Stelter and his guests is that it demonstrates to me that at this late date, they still don't understand how Donald Trump won in 2016. If you remember when Trump won in 2016, the New York Times actually sent out, they actually hired a company, I think, to do a survey of readership and of people in like upstate New York and rural areas of Pennsylvania and other areas across the country, because the New York Times had an article whereby they said, yeah, we missed it. We totally missed this Donald Trump phenomenon. And we're trying to determine why did we miss it? Because clearly we're not doing our jobs as reporters at the New York Times of determining why people were upset because we're not listening as reporters. And no sooner did that happen than they've jumped on the anti-Donald Trump train and working to get him impeached. And now at this late date, you still have the New York Times and CNN and Brian Stelter and all the other anchors over there talking about the fact that everybody's trying to take down Joe Biden, and that kind of media doesn't exist for Donald Trump. No one's trying to take down Donald Trump.
Later in his show, and I watched a separate clip, he then goes into instances where he thinks that the right-wing media is incorrect. And a lot of it is where we're talking about what appears to be Joe Biden's age, Joe Biden's mental acuity, as well as his just general, honestly, his general welfare in terms of how cognitive ability and things like that. And it's like, are we not allowed to be critical of, who's going to be the most important person in the world? Especially somebody who has to make decisions on his feet, many of them for the sake of the free world. And just the idea that, we can't be critical of Joe Biden when, Trump breathes and they say he does it wrong. To me, it's just such hypocrisy, but also just utter ignorance. Utter ignorance of, honestly, the lady, I thought it would have been a funny answer if when he asked her, do you think there's any media on the left like that? And she said, yeah, us. I thought that would have been hysterical.
That would have been really funny.
Yeah, missed opportunity. Yeah, it would have been honest. It would have been honest to the room, but
But clearly, they coordinate their answers before they go on the air because it's not just that he's giving the guests the questions in advance. He's actually telling the guests, look, the whole discussion is going to be around the fact that this doesn't exist, that there is no opposition media to Donald Trump. No one's criticizing him in the media.
Yeah, and so
how dishonest.
You want to watch a panel on CNN, and the traditional way that the news does panels is you have issue, but then you have, pro-issue and negative issue commentators. So, you have a Republican and a Democrat. You'll have somebody on one side of the issue and somebody on the other. But when you watch CNN, it's like usually like somebody against the thing that Trump did and somebody lesser against it. And it's just there's no, open dialogue, there's no conversation or opinion. It's just a construed narrative that's always, just being pushed down people's throats.
So, absolutely. So, next up, Amazon and mall operator Simon Property Group. So, Simon Property Group owns a lot of malls across the United States.
And
so Amazon is teaming up with Simon Property Group to see if the old Sears and JCPenney stores at all of Amazon, out of all the malls that Simon Property Group owns, could be converted to Amazon fulfillment centers. Now, the reason why we're talking about this, folks, is because it's not just a sign of the times, not just a sign of coronavirus, but if there were ever an issue whereby in American business that millennials have had an impact on, it would be e-commerce. And it has severely affected, of course, all of the traditional department stores. So JCPenney, of course, Sears, Lord & Taylor just filed for bankruptcy. Brooks Brothers just filed for bankruptcy.
Jose Banks,
Jose Banks. And how about Nordstrom? Did they file yet?
Probably. If they haven't, they will.
Yeah, I think it's only a matter of time. Probably Macy's. I don't think Macy's has filed, but I think it's probably only a matter of time for Macy's too. Although Macy's seems to be one of the stronger groups, if you want to call that strong.
Yeah.
Your generation, the millennial generation, has had an impact because you don't go to these stores. You pretty much really didn't go, except when you were younger.
A lot. You know, for as much as I sit and rail on Jeff Bezos and the Amazon monopoly issue, I am a loyal Prime member.
But here's my question: as a millennial, how do you go try on it? Let's say you're going to a wedding.
I guess, Mark. I'm going to be honest with you.
And you want to wear a suit, but you don't have a suit that fits anymore, or whatever the case may be. You want to go buy a suit. Where do you go?
Just guess.
There's nowhere to go.
Just guess.
Are we going to go rent it? I mean, that's pretty much where we are.
That's my one thing. Like, there's certain things that I still go in person and like try on and stuff. And you know, there will be places, I assume. You know, I don't think brick and mortar will totally disappear, but like you're going to see a lot of them. You know, reanalyzing their business plans and, you know, accommodating for such things. But a lot of people, like, this is going to sound so stupid, but their philosophy when it comes to buying things online is it's so cheap. I can order it, I can try it on at home, and if I don't like it, I'll just send it back.
Which is a pain in the neck to send it back.
A pain in the neck.
Yeah, I think it is.
When you're saving, you know, for a lot of people who feel like they're saving a lot of money.
And time.
Yeah. It's which to me, I don't really
gas.
think it is. You're saving a lot of time or money, you're saving money. But you're not saving what I would view as a lot of time or gas. I mean,
when you're packaging it back up and sending it out, that's definitely not time saved.
Yeah, I mean, you got to wait for it to be delivered, then you got to try it on. I mean, it is in some respects a lot more work, but you do it from the confines of your house. And I think that this generation is naturally a lot more it contains a lot more introverts, people who are more. You know,
millennials have destroyed retail.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, Amazon has
changed
had its
the way
impact,
that we have done retail.
But millennials in particular have bought in hook, line, and sinker into destroying retail. And my big issue with that is, particularly as it relates to millennials, is when it does come time for you to, you know, there's going to be a point where the millennial generation starts to really gain wealth for a variety of different reasons. And you're going to say, you know what, I would love to have the shopping experience, not just online because it's not as fun as actually going to a store. Where do you go? I mean, will Amazon, for example, and here's another question, will Amazon, for example, let's say they take over the Lord & Taylor up the street or they take over the JCPenney up the street as a fulfillment center. Will Amazon maybe have a little area in there that's maybe 2,000 square feet and a 150,000 square foot store where you could go in there and just try on a bunch of things? You never know. I mean, Amazon, they literally are putting everybody out of business, but you millennials are making it possible.
I would say, though, some of the issue, or some of where I think that there improvements can be made, a lot of these brick and mortar stores that you're seeing going out of business, I don't think they're adapting for the times per much. I think a lot of them are maintaining a 2 decades old business model in a 21st century technological...
100-year-old business model.
Yeah.
Their business model hasn't changed.
Yeah.
I agree.
I would shop online for, when I buy suits, I buy generally from Jose Banks. No free ads, but Jose Banks is where I shop. When it comes to their online experience, it's one of the better ones I've used for things like this, but it's still archaic,
Compared to Amazon,
Compared to Amazon, or just like any, of these
any company that started as an e-commerce company has a huge edge on the traditional brick and mortar stores for e-commerce.
Yeah, so
I agree.
One of the things that I felt encouraging was, and I'm going to talk about this business plan because, I think this is part of the issue of dealing with, the failing of brick and mortars is Jose Banks then decided what they're going to do is they're going to close down a series of locations. They're going to cut their brick and mortar stores in half. They're going to still maintain a certain number of them and just, try to look in where relative to population centers they best make sense. And to me that makes sense. And now, some of their products are going to be housed in their affiliates, Men's Warehouse or any other street stores that, are
They need to find a way to
regional-based.
cut costs because of the e-commerce revolution. There's no doubt about it.
But to me, it would just make so much more sense to embrace the e-commerce revolution. Develop a way to make it so all these products are hosted under one place.
It's a very late hour for them to do that.
It's a late
It's a
hour,
very
but this
late
is what
hour.
we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of companies like either sink or swim. Get with the times.
They
or,
refuse to do it.
or you see your way off the Fortune 500 list.
So next up, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up to the dumbest bill in America, Mr. Assistant Producer? Of course. And here it is. And it's the dumbest bill in America, and that is canceling the NRA. So, is this actually a bill? No, but it
a lawsuit.
probably would have to be a bill. It would actually have to be a constitutional amendment in order to achieve what the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, wants to accomplish. So, New York Attorney General Letitia James seeks to dissolve the NRA in New York State. And why? Well, she says that it's because of the fact that the NRA leadership has been fleecing the organization by self-dealing and buying stuff for themselves.
Yeah,
as
they're
opposed
using
to for the
charitable
organization.
funds,
This is what
and
she's saying.
for operating expenses for themselves.
But when you actually listen to her and you actually read the lawsuit, what she really is trying to do is use
Political agenda.
It's a political agenda to shut down the NRA in New York State and eliminate the Second Amendment in New York State.
Yes.
And hopefully send a message to all of her co-AGs across the country that you need to do the same so that we can get rid of the Second Amendment.
Or, use it as grounds to run for higher office.
Well,
There's definitely a lot of political aspirations there.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, did she ever talk about in her press conference the mayhem going on in New York City with respect to the riots and people breaking things, breaking and entering and stealing and so
We'll
forth?
find out.
Yeah, and you know what? If any of those people who own those stores actually were carrying and were inside their store when someone broke in, I'm sorry, I'd be shooting them. I'd say, look, here's your opportunity. You better leave right now. You broke my window of my store. You have an opportunity to leave right now before you snatch and grab, or I'm going to shoot you. How would you like to play this? And if they don't, well then, that's how you stop crime. That's how you stop crime. I mean, what's your other alternative? Call the police? They say they're going to defund the police.
Yeah.
So how do you protect yourself, Letitia
Take
James?
up arms. One of the coolest pictures that I saw when, the rioting all started in the wake of the George Floyd protests was the rooftop Koreans meme. So everybody remembers.
What the heck is that?
So in the 1990s,
Rooftop Koreans?
during the Rodney King riots in the 1990s, the rioters tried to go down Koreatown, LA. And they would, all these Korean store owners would actually they all went out and they all bought guns and they would sit on their roofs and they would camp their stores.
Wow.
And it was like a significant deterrent, and it's why Koreatown was one of the few neighborhoods during the Rodney King riots.
Never heard that. Did not
made it
know
through.
that.
Yeah, and so it was circling around, back when this all started again, because it's a pretty popular, concept in a lot of the libertarian circles.
Another reason why we call this podcast Escape from New York, like the movie.
Yeah.
So good old Letitia James talks about her lawsuit. We have a clip on this, and here it is.
Just a few minutes ago, my office filed a lawsuit against the National Rifle Association to dissolve the organization in its entirety for years of self-dealing and illegal conduct that violate New York's charities law and undermine its own mission. The National Rifle Association, or the NRA, is the largest and most influential pro-gun organization in the nation.
Oh my gosh, it's the
Oh my
largest and
God.
most pro-gun.
At least you said it was pro-gun.
How scary that must be. So meanwhile, Letitia in Manhattan and in Chicago and in most major blue cities across America, you have the innocent being savaged by the out-of-control mob. And what you're saying is that the best solution is to get rid of guns and get rid of the NRA, because that will solve the lawlessness in the streets, which you apparently don't have any desire to control as the AG.
Yeah. So, you know, first of all, I think it's a ridiculous argument that she's making, that even if she were able to prove any mispropriety of funds, that she can just solely go out and dissolve an organization like the NRA. I think, if anything, you would see restructuring. But, you know, this brings us to a good point. You know, the gun rights battle in the country is a very significant issue, and gun ownership is always under assault, specifically by the left. The NRA does a great mission, has a great mission, it does a great job in defending this liberty and our ability to exercise our constitutional amendments, as well as introduce new people to guns. You know, when I was a kid, I used to go to these NRA days, you know, at the local gun club, where they would have, you know, people who were members of the NRA come and introduce to you how to handle a gun, shoot a gun, and shoot different kinds of guns, but in a safe environment where you would learn to respect the gun, which is where I think a lot of the issues when it comes to gun ownership are very misunderstood. And, you know, I would say virtually all peaceful gun owners, you know, respect their gun, understand what it's capable of, and don't commit crime with it. You know, it's people who don't respect the idea of life and what a gun can do that are where you see a lot of these issues.
So here's my question. Do millennials, after watching what's been happening in America's blue cities with the mayhem, do millennials now perhaps see it more clearly, the importance of the Second Amendment?
Certainly America as a whole has. I mean, gun ownership.
But how about millennials in particular? Do they see why that Second Amendment is in place when you have blue state politicians saying, let's eliminate the police, in which case you no longer have a way of protecting yourself unless you arm yourself, but if you get rid of that, now you have no way whatsoever, unless you want to use a pot and pan or, you know, a bow and arrow.
I would say with millennials, it is as contentious an issue with us as it is with your generation.
So they still haven't seen the light.
Well, it's not everybody's seen the light. I'm sure, you know, there is definitely a good amount of, you know, millennials who appreciate firearms and respect them for what they are, but, you know, there's also always going to be those people who want to take that away from you, who see it as a you know, a barrier in the way of, you know, utopia.
And you know what? It's fascinating to me because it's just yet another reason people want to escape from New York. Mm-hmm. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining the Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our millennial Garrick Ross. We are back, tan, rested, and ready. And of course, our producer Adam Couture and our assistant producer Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.